everybody. Welcome to another Missions Monday. We're really excited about today. This is a very special Missions Monday because our missionary of the week is Robbie and Pat Evans, who are in Mexico. And I decided that I wanted to take a break on the interviewing. And so I invited Robbie and Pat's very good friends for many, many years, Pastor Doug and Valerie, to come in and have a conversation with Robbie and Pat throughout this Missions Monday interview. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. I'm looking forward to it. And so let's start by asking Robbie and Pat, where are you guys and what are things like for you during this quarantine time?
Well, we live in Morelia, Michoacan, which is in southwestern Mexico, if there could be a southwestern. We're about 300 kilometers due west of Mexico City, about 300 kilometers due east of Guadalajara, right in between the two. We live in the state of Michoacan, which is a very interesting state. Regarding the coronavirus, which I believe is what you're asking about, this week marks the 9th week that we have been in quarantine. And I really am beginning to believe that it affects people's mental health. So anyway, we've been in quarantine now for 9 weeks. And really, in spite of any announcements they might make, I really don't know when it's going to end. We might be here till the end of July, I don't know. So the quarantine itself is, unfortunately, it's on the rise. In certain areas of Mexico City, you're probably aware that Tijuana is quite a hot spot. Mexico City is quite a hot spot and getting hotter. Michoacan is not on the top of the list. We're about the middle of the list, but it's also on the upbeat here. There's a town called Lázaro Cárdenas where we used to live. It's a port city. It is a very hot spot. To my understanding, they cordoned the city off. Nobody goes in, nobody goes out, unless they really need to because of the coronavirus. So that's kind of what's going on. In our city, there are nobody knows. Nobody really knows how many people have died of coronavirus in Morelia. I would say it's anywhere between, they say multiply all government figures by 8. And right now they're up to about 75 in government figures. So you multiply that by 8 and I don't know, I guess you get, what is that, 400? I've lost my math right now, so I'm scared being on the camera. But anyway.
It's like about 400, yeah.
Anyway, in the country right now, it's gone about 6,000. If you multiply that times 8, that's quite a figure. So we personally have had some friends. One friend of ours in Mexico City, he was quarantined. He's a pastor. He was quarantined. He was in the hospital in isolation for 11 days. And he did survive and he got out, but he's had 8 people in his church die from coronavirus. And then also every week it's a different count of how many people have it. Here in Morelia, in the church, Más Vida, I'm not really aware of anybody who's died of the coronavirus in the church here, although some people have had it. But again, the communication is not good. The statistics are not good. And so it's very, very hard to really put your finger on it. So anyway, we're okay at the moment. Our daughter Kelly lives here with Andrew and their 3 children. They're here right now. And they're doing okay. And Katie's here with her husband Aaron and their 3 children, and they're doing okay. So
are you able to see your children, your grandchildren?
From about 6 feet away.
We don't see them very often. So sometimes they'll drop groceries by, or we usually go out. Well, I usually go out once a week to get groceries or whatever. And we might stop by to see them from the car outside, but that's about it. They're trying to protect us. I think the same thing's happening with Doug and Val.
Yeah, it's rough. Everybody's facing these new challenges all around. But one of the positives is it's inspired us to be more proactive in connecting with you guys like this. Mm-hmm. And this is a pretty cool thing. I know, in fact, when was the last time that you video chatted with your friends Doug and Val here?
I don't think we have video chatted.
We probably never have. The last time we saw them was in Peru when I beat Doug. at AC-DC.
Well, you have to recall, I know you're old and your memory's fading, but we ended up tied.
You did that on purpose because you were afraid that you were going to slide down the hill.
Oh.
Anyway, we'll play again some other day.
So
But we
how
all know
long, let's get some background here. How long and when did you guys meet the ministry partnership here between Living Way Church and Robbie and Pat Evans? When was that? When did that begin? And what was the cause of that?
I believe, I think it was around 1980 is my guesstimate. I was introduced to Robbie and Pat through Steve Fitzpatrick, who was on staff with me at the time. And Steve, I guess, maybe met you when he was down there in McAllen Church.
Right.
And that's where he first met you guys. And he told me that I needed to connect with Robbie and Pat Evans.
It wasn't 80 because we
it
were
would have been a little later.
Yeah, it's about 86, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, mid-'80s?
Because we moved to Mexico in '79.
Right.
So you were pastoring at the time in Ottawapan.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, okay. That was
So it would have
around
been 80, 83, 84, 85.
Okay, I think that might have been because we actually went to your church in Ottawapan. And so that's when we first began to connect. So early 80s, maybe mid 80s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Long time.
I remember when you came, it was one of the most spectacular sermons you preached out of the book of Revelation that I've ever heard.
Yes, it's all about the bulls.
That's it. You started,
And the seals.
he started preaching about the 7 bulls in the book of Revelation. I thought, I've never seen a bull in the book of Revelation, but maybe he's been into the Greek. So go on with it. And then the next thing he's talking about is the 7 seals. And I'm thinking, I've never seen a seal in the book of Revelation. Must be because he lives next to, what is it, the water place there?
SeaWorld.
I thought, maybe it must be SeaWorld or something. And I think, this guy, he's a nice guy, but come on now, bulls and seals in the book of Revelation. I mean, the seals have a ball on their nose or what? And so anyway, when I finally realized how he had mispronounced his words and misled his interpreter, I had to stop and start the whole sermon all over again. Anyway, you just got to get on the same page.
I think that's the last time I preached on the bulls and seals too.
I hope so. I would hope so. It didn't edify anybody. It just confused them. So anyway.
Way confused.
Well, when we first met you, I can remember, I think it might have been Katie, that I played some chess with. She was learning chess. We played. So I think what we would be interested in, and I think the church would be interested in, before we talk ministry and Spain and Mexico and all of that, I think it'd be good to hear from Pat about exactly how many grandchildren you have and where they're all living. You mentioned Aaron, but I think you have some up in New York and scattered around.
We have 3 children. Actually, when we moved to Mexico, Jonathan was 5 months old. And so when I think about old Jonathan he's 42. That's how long we've been in Mexico. Mm-hmm. But Jonathan's a pastor in New York, in a city of Oswego. They have 5 children. And we just talked to him just a few minutes ago. And their oldest is 18 now, down to 6. Wow. 6 years old. And then Kelly and Andrew, they live here. They pastor a church here and have several campuses. They have 3 children. Jonathan, one of his is adopted, one of Kelly's is adopted. And so that's been a neat experience for us. And then Katie and Aaron, they have 3 children. So we have 11 grandkids altogether.
Awesome.
I think you beat us, don't you?
Yeah, we're at 14.
Oh my goodness. Amazing.
It's not a competition. It's not a competition.
It wasn't between Leah and Rachel either.
Yeah, no competition here.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, I think we've ended.
I forgot, where did you say Aaron and Katie are now?
They're right there.
Yeah, they live here in Morelia now. They worked in the church here for like 11 years. Then they went to Puebla, worked 3 years there in a church, and then they were in Juarez for 2 years.
But now
it
they're
is-
back.
Yeah, now they're back because Aron's father has a candy factory that's been in the family like 80 years. And he invited Aron to come back and take that because he wants to retire. So they decided to do that. Mhm.
That's cool. Is the candy factory up and running still during the pandemic?
Well, it's the factory is still, they have 3 stores here in Morelia. They're partially running. He has 40 employees and he's put them on part-time, right?
They're on part-time and he's given a half-time salary on a part-time, work schedule because they're not really,
They're
things
not
are just,
supposed to be.
they're not
open,
supposed to be in production. And again, with everything closed up, it's kind of hard for sales. Although he's gotten quite a few sales. He got a sale the other day from
A contract, yeah.
HEB, which is a chain of supermarkets in Texas and northern Mexico. So he's oddly enough, he's done very well staying afloat, which I believe, is just a sign that once this is over, they're going to prosper. But
I'm sorry.
no, they're getting ready to open up production again because he is having a lot of orders come in. So anyway, he's got a lot of plans.
So I want to jump in on this because it's pretty fun to watch that you guys obviously have this pretty good friendship. And as you just described, it's 36 years in the making. So
Mhm.
I'm curious, and again, back 36 years ago, you guys weren't sending text messages to each other and checking in on each other's Facebook walls. So how do you maintain a long distance friendship over the course of 35 years? I find that to be very interesting, and I'm curious, what does it take?
Well, I think number one, you have to like each other. And I mean, that sounds redundant, but I think the first time we met your parents, Doug and Val, I can honestly say I think we fell in love with them in the right sense, that we thought these are very nice people. They're honest people. They're for real. And we kind of think alike. And so, that was, I think, foundational. And then over the years, well, there are telephones. And so, we're able to use, telephone conversations for this or for that. And then other times I think we were able to go to Poway probably at least once a year
For those
the
missionary
missions conference
conventions really help too.
or
Yeah.
other things. And so I think it just kind of developed. Your father also came down here and preached for us on a few occasions. And we actually went to Cuba one time. We just recently were in Peru, which was fun. And so it's just, sometimes you run into people that they have a kindred spirit. I'm not sure that's the right word, but I'll call it a kindred spirit with the same values.
Right.
And I've always enjoyed beating your dad at AC/DC. So, I mean, what can I say?
I'm an easy one to beat, and I don't mind losing, so that's okay. But when I was down right before the lockdown, I was preaching at our church in Maui, and I was preaching about David and Jonathan. And I said the unique thing about that relationship was they both had the same long-term vision, which was the victory of God's people over the enemy. And Jonathan was a warrior. He had taken on the Philistines. He and his armor bearer had won a great victory and a number of other things. But when he saw David come back with the head of Goliath, and he saw David's exploits in battle, he immediately stripped himself of his own armor and all that, and he was a lifelong friend to David. And the main reason was they both had the same spiritual vision, which was conquering the enemy and seeing God's people prosper. And I think more than anything else, we have interest in baseball, we have interest in games, we're both competitive, all of that. But more than that, we have the same spiritual vision, which is the triumph of the church, reaching the nations, and the gospel going out.
Right.
I would say also we have the same ethical vision in the kingdom of God. So that also counts for quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And every time we got together, these girls were always talking about the kids and the grandkids.
And plus, we all know how to have fun too. I mean, we can be spiritual, but we also like to have fun.
Wait. That doesn't mean having fun is not spiritual.
No. I mean, it's the most spiritual thing you can do, right?
It's kind of refreshing.
We've had sometimes as two couples getting together and doing vacation stuff together and
Right.
things like that.
Well, we went to Las Vegas at one time.
Yeah, we introduced them to the sins of Las Vegas, and and got to see one of the Cirque du Soleil shows.
Exactly.
And that was so much fun. That was great.
It was.
You took us to see there was an exhibition, I believe it was the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh yeah, we did that too.
Right.
That was super fascinating. Then a couple of years ago, we actually went to the place there, where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I couldn't help but remember.
But they didn't take us with them when they went. They didn't invite us along.
Well, we were invited by another group from Mexico to go, so if we had been running the show, So.
What I found interesting too, and Pastor Daniel might not remember this, but Robbie and Pat, they started in what they call the hot country. So I thought they were used to the heat. We had them come out as our couple retreat speakers in Palm Desert one July. It was 115, and Robbie thought it was hot.
Well, that was a little excessive.
I remember that.
It's a dry heat, and the coast is a wet heat. That was just a little excessive. I saw how all the flowers wilted in the morning. I thought, this can't be, So.
You noticed the asphalt melting in the afternoon too.
It sticks on your shoe.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome. I love it. I love seeing the lifetime friendships. It's so cool. And so just for those who aren't familiar with your background, and what was it that led you guys to Mexico in 1979, as you mentioned? Where did you come from? How did you get there? And what's kept you there ever since?
We were both converted in 1972 at the height of the Jesus movement in Springfield, Illinois. And when we were converted, we weren't married, obviously, at that time. But when we were converted, we both began to attend a church on the wrong side of town called Bethel Assembly, pastored by a wonderful man and his wife, Delbert and Beverly Wells. And we started going to church there. We weren't saved in the church. We were saved outside of the church. But we started going to church there. And Pastor Wells had been a missionary. He went to Nigeria when he was 19. Came back, I think, when he was 26, and then he went back again. So anyway, he was in Africa for all those years in Nigeria. And then one day the Lord spoke to him and told him he'd be going to Springfield, Illinois to pastor such and such a church. And 2 weeks later, we got a letter from the church, and they invited him to go and pastor that church. So he went, and he got there, and he preached so effectively that the church went from 40 down to, I think it was 7. So he was going in reverse church growth. And about that time, it was like, now what do we do? And that's when the Jesus movement came, and the church within 6 months grew to around 300 people. Most young people. Pat's mom was saved at that time, but I think she was about the oldest person in the church. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Pastor Wells, because he had a vision, a heart for world missions, what happened was one night he snuck up on us all and preached a real challenging mission, or word about missions, the need of the nations. And I don't need to go into all the details, but that night God apprehended both of our hearts for missions separately, because we weren't married. But in each of us, he captured our hearts for missions, and that changed the direction of our lives. Then later on, we got married and went to Elam Fellowship, and then it's kind of like our Elam Bible Institute. And it's kind of like, okay, Lord, we're going to the nations, but which nation are we going to? And at that time, we had a friend. His name was Bob Blodgett and his wife Dorothy. They lived in Brownsville, Texas. They were Elam missionaries. And also in school, I met 2 missionary kids, John and Tom Speaker, whose parents had been missionaries in Mexico, and they grew up in Uruapan, Michoacan, which is about 120 kilometers from here. So anyway, I got to know them well, and God began to lead us. And I know when we graduated from Elam, we took a group of students and we went to Mexico, and we did like a world tour. Everybody we knew or had ever met in Mexico, we went and visited them, saying, Lord, show us where we should go in Mexico. Show us. And finally, when we got to the ugliest place that was farthest away on the coast, it was hot.
Place.
There was a town that actually had been a fishing village of 40 huts. and they converted it into an industrial center because of the river. So it was like a crazy wild place in its beginnings. But anyway, that's where we wound up. And that we got there in May of '79. So that's kind of how we got here. And we're still here. So, not still on the coast, but we're in Morelia now. And we're still here, and I don't think we're leaving.
I will say, Pastor Daniel, that my first 4 years in, you mentioned something about how we've stayed here all this time. I will admit that my first 4 years in Mexico were very hard for me. There were several times that I came to the point of, I can't do this. It wasn't any one thing, it was a lot of things, cultural things, just a lot of things that happened, different things. But anyway, I will say that during those times of almost telling Robbie, I can't do this, Robbie was really patient with me, and the Lord was very good to me. And we stayed. I remember one day Robbie said the Bible, he didn't say it strangely, but he did say it to me, and it was true. He said, Pat, the Bible does say that his grace is sufficient. And I can say that all this time, all these years later, his grace has been sufficient. He has been faithful. He has been good. And I'm so glad that he kept us here the first 4 years, because here we are these many years later. It hasn't been easy, but I'm very thankful that we're still here.
Let me say, Lázaro Cárdenas, we're talking 41 years ago, truly was like the wild, wild west. And we arrived in Lázaro Cárdenas. I think the average temperature every day was 90 degrees. Probably the humidity was hitting about the same or beyond, because it's right on the coast. And it was a very interesting place. We wound up starting and pastoring a church in a little town, maybe 10 miles from there, a fishing village called Petacalco. And that was quite a cultural experience. Its nickname was the Slaughterhouse. And they were killing people there all the time just because of the culture. Everybody's armed. You run into somebody, you start shooting. And it was quite I would say truly a cultural experience for us. And also living in Lázaro itself. I know they robbed our house once or twice, and we had earthquakes and, just anything and everything. It was just, Kelly was born there prematurely, and she was in the hospital for 6 weeks in Lázaro Cárdenas in an incubator. And Pat would go every day to breastfeed her, but it was pretty crazy. They had her in an incubator in the emergency room. And I remember we were praying one night. This is the truth. We were praying. It's like, Lord, you got to keep her there. She weighed up like 3.5 pounds.
Wow.
And Lord, you got to keep her there. And I really, honestly, I had a vision of an angel standing at attention, like at the foot of her incubator, just watching over her. And if she needed anything, it was very interesting in the vision. The angel was just going to look at somebody and transmit a thought to them, like, go and check on the little white baby. And then all of a sudden, the nurse would come over and check it out. Oh, yeah, she needs this and this and that. So that made me realize, okay, she truly is in God's hands. And she's 40. She'll be 40 here next month. Mm-hmm. But that was quite a cultural experience. That's all I can say. But God was very good. And,
right.
Here we are. It's been a long road. 40 years doesn't go by quick. But it does go by, and when you finally get to the end of it, it's like, gee, that was quick. So
I think it's incredible, and I love seeing it, and both with you guys and with my parents, this lifetime of rooted ministry, of hearing the call of God and pursuing it with everything that you have. And I'm curious, this is for both of you couples, as I don't want to do a generational observation, but I want you to do a generational reflection on what things in your life do you think contributed to that passion for a lifetime of serving Jesus, and how can those same qualities be cultivated in the next generation and the next generation and the next generation?
Well,
we'll pass it to Doug.
We'll let Doug
pass it over to Val. I never thought of generational. We were associate pastors in Phoenix, Arizona for 2 years when I felt God called me out, and I had a specific word to start Living Way Church when I was up in some meetings up in Canada, in Quebec, Canada, and came back and told Val, and ever since we just plodded ahead. But we just took one day at a time. You know, Jesus said that sufficient today is the evil thereof. You know, you have enough situations every day. So I just never thought of, you know, long term, 40 plus years in one place. I just said, okay, you know, let's do the best we can for the Lord today. And so I can't really say that when I've heard stories of pastors start a church saying, I'm going to be here the next 40 years. You can count on me. But I don't think I ever said that. We just sort of took it a day at a time and just plowed away. And like Jesus said, don't take hold of the plow, don't look back, just keep looking forward. And I guess that would describe my experience is we just didn't want to look back. We just kept looking forward.
I think we got some really good advice. You know, I think everybody in ministry wants to quit at some point. There's always points that you just go,
Mondays.
Yeah, you just think, I can't do any more of this. But I remember once a pastor that we really respected spoke to us and said, do you remember when God called you to this? You know, and everybody can pinpoint that. You know what happened. You know there was something that God spoke to you, and so you did it. And he said, just keep doing it until you know God's speaking to you to go in a different direction. Mm-hmm. And I think I know that for us, you know, it was very clear to us when the time came for us to pass the baton. That became very clear, and we knew this. And I think that was really reassuring to us that we knew when we started, we knew when it was time to let it go. And I know I've seen in Robbie and Pat's lives that you've had several different moves, but you've always been with, you knew what God had called you to do, and you knew when it was time to let go of this one and go to the next thing. And I think that's really important. Mm-hmm. That's just my view on it.
I'll let you speak first.
Well, I will admit this. When we first came to Mexico, I remember Robbie started to talk to me one day about being in Mexico 5 years. And I said, wait a minute. I had in my mind 2 years and we'll see how it goes. You know, I couldn't imagine it then. But again, it was about that time that we had gone back to Illinois. And this, for me, you're talking about certain things that really mark you. I remember it marked me, or the Lord marked me, and it took a little while for me to realize what was going on. We had gone back to Illinois. I was in a prayer meeting at Brother Wells's church, on my knees, got up, turned around, sat on the bench, and kind of like a ticker tape, the verse went through my mind. If you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you're willing to lose your life, you'll find it. And I didn't know what that meant, but if I was going to write a verse over my life as a missionary, that would be it. Because when I went, I admit I went with reservations. I was afraid. I was nervous. I was willing, but I was nervous. I lived in the same house all my life. I hardly left my city, you know, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, when I went, I had, especially my kids, very tightly held in my hands, and the plans and the dreams that I had for them, they were there. And when the Lord spoke that to me, he was so gracious that through different circumstances, different experiences in our lives, one by one, he lifted my fingers up. And finally, I was able, by his grace, to let my plans, my dreams, my kids, in a sense, back to him. And I agree with Doug. Especially me, I didn't come thinking, oh, I can do this for 40 years. No, I couldn't. It was one day at a time. But the Lord has been good. And it's like you said, Val, he told us to come here, and up to now, he hasn't told us to go back yet. So
let me answer also. This will sound weird what I'm going to say, but you say, how is it that you stay there that many years? And I would say, well, it's personal. And you'd say, well, what do you mean by that? I was converted at 18 in the emergency ward of a hospital in Springfield, Illinois. I was a drug addict. Prior to that, my life was a disaster, but somebody who's invisible stepped into my life and revealed himself to me, Jesus. And so the night I was converted, I bowed my knee in the emergency room to him. And I said, Lord, forgive me for everything I've done. Please come into my life. And he came. But it wasn't like I'm going to join church or be religious or anything. It was personal. I mean,
Right.
I know, and I knew that he's the living Lord, and he had come to me personally. And the night I was called, we were called to missions, was, to me, is very powerful. I'll explain it as quickly as I can. As I say, Pastor Wells he was pretty sharp, and he saw all these young kids in his church, you know, and so he's thinking 300 missionaries. So anyway, get there one night, and he says, I'm going to preach on the need for the nations. And I thought, I'm out of here, man. I know where he's going. He's going to try and get us all to go to the nations. But I didn't want to get up and leave, so I thought, I'll stay for the service. I just won't listen to him. So what I did was I took the hymnal out of the pew. We had hymnals back then. Took the hymnal out of the pew. I thought, I'll educate myself on all the hymns in this book. Who wrote it, when, what's the melody, ta, ta, ta. And I was doing a really good job. I mean, I was so absorbed in that finally his voice was way off in the distance. And I thought, I'm going to survive the silver bullet tonight. But then what happened was I had a vision. Literally, I had a vision. And this vision was not small. This vision was like going to the drive-in theater. I mean, it was a vision that filled my whole, well, I don't know how to say it, my whole field of vision. And I closed my eyes, it's still there. Opened my eyes, it's still there. I couldn't get rid of it. I mean, I was in it. I could see it. And it was an ocean, I'll use that term, an ocean of faces, human faces. They weren't white, they weren't black, they were in between, and of all ages. And they were all looking at me. And when they were looking at me, I could see such an emptiness in their eyes. And it's like the emptiness was, we're lost and we have absolutely no hope at all. And it was just this terrible sense of loss and emptiness that I could see in their eyes. And it was from the adults down to the children. And as I'm looking at that, I could also see in their eyes, this is a question. And it's like, won't you come and tell us about what you have? Won't you come and tell us about him? And when I saw that, and I saw their emptiness, and I saw their question, I started thinking, oh, now I get it. This is what he's talking about. This is what the pastor's talking about. Taking what you have to those in the nations who don't have it and perish. And so I started to, add some things up in my brain. And the first one was, it's like, well, Lord, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here. I'd be dead and in hell today if it weren't for you. And because of that, the truth is, I'm not really the owner of my life. I don't own myself because you bought me. You redeemed me with your blood. I belong to you. So that leads me to the following conclusion. I don't have any right to dictate what I'm going to do with my life because I don't belong to myself. You're the only one who has the right to dispose of my life however you would want to do it.
Exactly.
And if you are wanting to send me to the nations, then I have no other recourse than to go to the nations. Because it's personal and I belong to you. And if that's what you want to do with me, then you're within your right to do that.
Right.
And so we'll go. And it's kind of like our hearts, my heart that night, Pat's heart, she had her own encounter, but my heart was like captured. Paul says, I'm a prisoner of Jesus Christ. And that's what happened. And so after that, it's a matter of, well, okay, where do we go? I went to Bible school. We had different experiences. Finally, the Lord just made it very plain. We're supposed to come to Mexico. And so all of life has been a matter of following him. And there are places where you end in a certain place. I knew our time on the coast was up. Where do we go now, Lord? We'll go there. And then after Uruapan, I was like, well, where do we go now? Go to Morelia. And so it's all been a matter of what I'll say, following him personally, wherever he leads. And, you don't lose anything. You gain everything. People say, man, you really lost a lot going to Mexico. I say, we didn't lose a thing. We've gained everything. I'd hate to think of where my life would be if I had not come here, So you don't lose in following the Lord. You always gain in following the Lord. And so we're here. I had, when we first, do you remember Wayne Kirschbaum from Marino, Colorado?
No, I didn't
He
know.
was an old latter-rain prophet. When the first 2 months we were here, John and I went to Mexico City to a conference, and Wayne Kirschbaum was preaching, and he stopped in the middle of his sermon and he pointed at me, and I thought, oh my God. Then he pointed at me and told me to stand up. He said, stand up, young man. I thought, oh man, this ain't gonna be good. So anyway, I stand up and he begins to prophesy to me, and he says, God has called you to be a father in this nation. And I don't remember what else he said. But I remember going home telling Pat, I said, you know, this is what this guy said. I said, I think I'm a little young for that. But now here we are, 41 years later.
Right.
And we've continued on. And, you know, to become an elder in a nation, all you have to do is walk in integrity and live a long time. You know, I mean, that's kind of simple, but if you know what I mean. So anyway, at this point in time, in the last few years, we're just beginning to walk into that role, I think, as truly a father in this nation, but it's to the younger pastors and leaders. And, you know, hopefully that phase will last a while instead of, you know, it's all over. But I find that more and more and more and more and more and more in our lives. With John, we were able to collaborate with John to start the Alianza Vida Abundante. It's maybe got 150 churches now and missionaries in Spain. We have our own group of pastors that we're working on and really working with them and helping them out. But because we've been here so long and have been able to walk in integrity, you know, I'm not boasting in that, but I mean, there's no major scandals. We've been able to walk in integrity. So God has just given us, I'll call it a grace or a favor in this nation, and we're able to help younger ministers. So I think most people would say, well, gosh, this guy's over the hill now. You know, he should be planting a church or, you know, building Jurassic Park somewhere. But I think we're actually in the most fruitful phase of what our ministry could be, because Mexico as a nation is a nation of orphans. I remember once in a while when I looked at the 22 kids in our music group in the church, 3 of them lived with their father. The rest of them didn't know their father or the parents were divorced. Mexico is a father without nations. And if you can be a father in the body of Christ, you will never run out of people that you can help. And those relationships don't end in a day. Hopefully they don't end in a day. They can last probably not to the end of my life, but at least, or not to the end of the other people's lives who we're helping, but maybe the end of our lives. But there's just a lot that can be done. So that's why we're here. And there really is no other place that I'd rather be. And I think Pat would say the same. It's not very easy sometimes, but the will of God's never easy. So
this is so good. That
is sufficient.
The way that you guys, all 4 of you, answered that question, I think, man, that however long that was, about 12 minutes of how do you stay with it for the long run? Those are fantastic answers, and I really hope that a lot of people get a chance to watch this because that's just so cool. So, Robbie, as you're talking about like being a father and an elder and walking in integrity for a long time, and what that creates, what's really fun about this these mission interviews we've done, this is the 4th one. The 3 previous were all got by graciously with younger missionaries. The Pastor Mark Bocanegra, who's planting a church in Japan, and I think he said he's just recently turned 30. Then we had a interview with Mark and Crystal Bonnell, who just in January started in the Dominican Republic, and they're in their mid-20s.
Wow.
And then last week we talked with Nick and Kristen Balcom, whom you know, who are later 30s. But so mid-20s, early 30s, later 30s of missionaries.
Wonderful.
It's so exciting to see. And I'm glad that we get to partner with that. But I would be curious for all of you, what do you think? What single piece of advice would you give to young missionaries or to people who are like on the fence? And you've already talked a little bit about this, on the fence and maybe feeling a little bit of the tug of God in their life to go all the way into missions.
Well, I probably would just tell them to go for it. I talked to Wayne Myers today, Wayne Myers is 98 years old. He's been in Mexico for 62 years. And he's almost bedridden now, but he's still wanting to preach to the whole world. So what I would say is you have to make a decision sooner or later. You can't sit on the fence forever. A double-minded man's unstable in all his ways and unfruitful in all his ways. So you have to make a decision, but you never lose by choosing for God.
Right.
And as he says, if he who loses his life will gain his life. And again, I would say, you know, we had the voices from the family and other people. What, are you crazy? You're going to Mexico? When are you coming back? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, man, you're going to waste your life. I don't think so. We've sown our lives into the kingdom of God. And if you lose your life, you gain your life. I really honestly could not imagine a better life that we could have had than the one we've had. I'm not saying there hasn't been problems. But when I look at it, I think I couldn't imagine having had a better life than the one we've had. Not that we're rich, but we have God and we've done his purpose. And how many people have we seen changed? And it's just, there's no comparison really between the riches of the kingdom of God and the riches of this world. And so I don't feel like we've lost anything. And I'm very happy that our children, you know, they've followed in the same path. And it's not because we made them. I think they've seen it. You know, they've touched it. They've figured it out. And so you don't lose. What do you lose when you follow God? You just lose some things of this world. But what do you gain? Well, you gain everything, really. So that's what I would say. And you have to learn to die to yourself in order to live to others. There's a whole series of things in there. But what would you say?
Just two things that I think of is, for one thing, I remember our pastor said to me, asked me a question and then told me, Pat, you need to go with your own faith. And I would say if a couple was going, to make sure that they're both in agreement, and in however it might have come to them, or they might have that, both of them would have that conviction and faith in them, because there'll be times, especially for the wife, I needed my own faith and my own conviction that God would keep me. And then, but I would also say, if you were a new missionary getting ready to go, I remember how valuable my pastor's wife, who had been a missionary in Africa, her counsel was so valuable to me. So I would look for other missionaries that you can maybe tell it's been a good time for them. It's been a good experience. I remember doing that through the years. I'd meet some missionaries and look at them and think, I don't know if I want to end up like them, you know, right. Or meet some other missionaries and sit down and would really want to talk with them. And then I think the third thing that I would say, especially as a woman, as a mom, is to always remember that the will of God is good for the whole family.
Right.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, yes, you can.
You know, we call it the Great Commission. I think maybe for Jesus, it's the Great Project. In other words, he died on the cross, he's risen from the dead. So now the project is to have the gospel preached in all the nations. What could be more exciting?
Exactly.
Being called by him personally, to be a co-laborer with him in what he's doing in the nations. I mean, I guess you can say that's an honor. You can think it's a privilege, and I guess it is, but what could be more exciting than doing that? And really, you know, forget what I'm going to say, but what could be of greater value? I mean, I don't want to be comparative with different things. But I mean, if his main purpose right now is to preach the gospel in all the nations, and he says, hey, come on, follow me, I'll make you a fisherman. I want you to participate in this. You're participating in the greatest project that there's ever going to be, probably, in this world. You know, once he's died and risen, the greatest project is to preach the gospel, establish the church in the nations. So how does that compare with being a car salesman? You know what I mean? Or how does that compare with other things? And I don't despise those things, but if God calls you to be a part of what he's doing, don't miscalculate. You'll never find anything as great and as glorious and as much fun. I mean, people ask me, how do you like it? I said, I've had a lot of fun. This has really been fun.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how else to say it. I mean, you know, to me, that's the greatest thing there can be. But we're called to it and we love it. So
I appreciate that passion for missions. But at the same time, I would say, and again, and this is to what you were saying, not to disparage the ministries or the works of those that are not called into ministry, but from over here, the local church perspective, Pastor Doug and Val, you instilled a mission vision into the congregation of Living Way Church that helped provide support to missionaries
Yes.
all throughout. So what made mission such a key vision in the life of Living Way Church?
Well, in 1971, I had a prophetic word come over my life, because I think, like Robbie and Pat, we've been affected by prophetic confirmation and revelation from God. And a word came to me that I would be a pastor, but I would not be confined to one church, but I would go out in and out amongst the nations. So both Val and I went on our very first mission trip in 1972, where we went to Japan. And I can still remember, like it was yesterday, standing on a beach in Japan and doing a flannel graph story of Elijah and fire coming down from heaven. I can remember the whole thing. And since that time, God's allowed us both to go in and out of mission field. I mean, I've been in places, God's opened doors for me to go to places that I never expected, whether it's the high Arctic Circle where it was 85 degrees below zero, or whether it was in the Cuba with Robbie, and in the midst of when the United States was locked down to going into Cuba, we were still able to go in there, to the interior of China, to South America, Central America. And even though I'm not a missionary, I was a pastor, God opened these doors where I could go in and out amongst the mission field. And I think that's important for our church to know, that you may not be a full-time missionary for 40 years in a different country like Robbie and Pat have been, but you may go on short team missions, or you may be a prayer warrior for missions, or you may be a great benefactor for missions. So there's so many ways to be involved in the reaching of the nations without being a lifelong missionary. And I think that's very important in our day, especially with the technology we have now, that you can touch so many nations in so many ways without having to necessarily raise your family, learn a language and all that. Though that's also, like you mentioned, the young people that we're involved with, that's still a valid thing that we still believe in. But I think people need to realize they can touch nations in so many ways. In fact, we had a lady in our church for about 20, 25 years named Florine. And every Sunday when she would come to the church, I'd say, "How are you doing, Florine?" And she would say, "Oh, it was great. I was in China today. I was in Pakistan today. I was in Africa today." I said, "Yes." She said, "Yep, I was praying for those nations, so I was there." And that kind of commitment and vision, I think that goes a long way to being a real missionary.
Oh, yes.
I think, Robbie, when he mentioned that verse, that we realize our life is not our own. And I think that's really what it comes down to. Every one of us, we may have a plan, we think we have a purpose, but God ultimately has the plan. And when we realize that we are not our own, we were bought and paid for with an incredible price, then it doesn't matter what he calls us to do. That's not our call. It's his decision. And he puts us where he wants us. And when he does, again, his grace is sufficient. It's enough for it. And we'll be able to do the things that he's called us to do, whether it's we never leave our own living room or we go all over the world. You never know what God will call us to do, but I do believe the vision will always be the same, and that's to reach the lost. And every one of us will do it in the way that he puts in our own heart. If I could give one word of admonition, though, that I've seen people before receive a word, and they acknowledge they've seen a word, but they want to get all their ducks in a row before they're willing to step out on this. And sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith. Sometimes you just have to say, I know what God's called me to do. I'm going to do this. You know, people have, my pastor feels good about it, you know, and maybe I don't have everything lined up. Maybe I don't see the 20-year plan going out here, but I'm going to step out in what this is now. And then we'll see what God will do, because I know you guys, I know us, we had no business doing what we did, you know. I mean, we had nothing. We had nothing lined up. We were so young and so dumb, you know. But God just somehow he supplied every need as it came along.
Yes.
You know, we didn't have it figured out.
Yes.
It's like
yes.
somebody said, it's amazing what God has been able to do in spite of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Just let me clarify what I said. Maybe I'd like to use the invasion of Normandy as an example. When the Allies went into Normandy, it wasn't just the people who hit the beaches or the paratroopers. There's a whole army behind them.
Right.
Behind them, there's a whole country, the United States. But it's all one goal. It's all one project. It's just concerted. Everybody's working together. So I think as a missionary, this will, understand this. Maybe we get to be one of the paratroopers who jumps behind the enemy's lines, or maybe we're in the first wave to hit Omaha Beach, which are all kind of high-risk professions. But it's still an honor, and that's what we're called to do. But when it's all said and done, the reward is going to be spread out according to their participation. And if it weren't for people like Living Way Church and other people that have helped us and prayed for us and helped us over the years, we wouldn't be here. So ultimately the reward is, I just can't say, look what I did. You have to say, look what we did. And ultimately you have to go beyond and say, look what he did. And so it's nobody's eating the cake by themselves.
Yeah, I hope I didn't make you feel uncomfortable with what you said, because I agree with you. And my ultimate goal, honestly, my biggest prayer for these Missions Monday interviews is to inspire the next generation to take the biggest risk possible and to go out into the mission field and to bring the gospel to the nations, knowing that we have a church body that has a passion to support missionaries and to, that financial support and the prayer support, and to keep sending and to keep putting on our mission conferences, and to keep sending out unto the nations more and more missionaries, because the gospel, as you said, it's got to go to all the ends of the earth. And it's so cool that we get to be partners with you, that for 40 years, you guys have been faithful in serving God where he's placed you. I'm so thankful. And this has been fun. It's gone by too fast though. And we're now at the end of our time. So I want to ask, how can we be praying for you, Robbie and Pat, and the work God's doing in Mexico, especially as things are different now from that they've ever been?
That's kind of a big question regarding us. We definitely need strength, health. I mean, I hate to say it, I actually am getting older. I never thought it would happen, but we're finally getting there. And so we need strength, we need health, we need wisdom, we need favor, we need anointing, we need understanding. At this moment in time, our ministry right now is full-time traveling. I'm not quite sure when we're going to go back to traveling full-time.
Right.
Because there's a series of factors because of the coronavirus that I'm thinking, man, if we don't get over this quick, I might be too old to go back and travel full-time. I mean, you just don't know. So, we need that. At the same time, we need God's visitation in this country. You need God's visitation in the United States.
Yes.
We need God. We need God to come down. And so I don't know, what would you like to say?
I think, Robbie covered it all. The only thing I would add is, because it is a very real thing here, is protection. I'm once a mom, always a mom, but we have 2 daughters and their families that live here, and the violence, especially where we live, has only gotten worse. And so besides the virus, what we live, as far as violence, kidnapping, all that, it's not just Robbie and I, but we have our 2 daughters and their families, and our grandkids and stuff, and that can weigh on us. That does weigh on us. So that's the only thing I would add.
Violence is the piece of bread, and now they put the peanut butter of coronavirus on top of the bread.
Wow.
And so you have 2 very difficult factors going on. The cartels have not slacked off because of the coronavirus. They've taken advantage of the weaknesses to further extend their purposes. There have been several capos, they call them capos, that have died of the coronavirus. But it's just life. That's just how Mexico is at this moment in time. It's a boiling pot. And also the government is, many people are not happy at all with the government. And just somebody told me the other day, they were thinking that if the government tries to take over the banks, then that's going to be a real problem. Like, so it's just, it's a boiling pot. It's a world of turmoil. But we really honestly believe that coming out of the coronavirus, that there's going to be some sort of a breakthrough, because thousands of people are tuning into the churches who would never darken the door of the church. And so you don't know how that's all going to work out in real life, but people are listening to the gospel at a greater rate and extensity than ever before in this nation. I mean, churches that have 500 people, they might end up with 4,000, 5,000 hits on a Sunday. People are listening to their services. And, you know, the word is falling but in their hearts. But at the same time, the internet will never be a substitute for live. The communion of the saints, the presence of God, real life preaching is a whole different dynamic. Prayer time with people.
Right.
And so, you know, when that comes back, but this will kind of getting off. But I've known people now that have opened their churches in the States and in Spain and in Italy. 10% of the people have come back so far. So they're waiting for the other 90%.
Right.
And but anyway, we believe that this coronavirus is somehow going to, I would say, humble the nation, humble many people, break them, so that when it's all over, there'll be a greater seeking of God, not so much on the part of the church, although there will be, but people who don't know Christ, and those who probably will have found Christ, maybe in their living room, during this whole thing. So all things work together for good. So, but we need the grace of God. That's all we can say.
If I could just say real quick, though, Pastor Daniel, and to all of you, really, thank you so much. I mean, we've been here all this time, but all that time, almost the whole time, you and Living Way Church has been faithful to us in giving and prayers, and it really means, I mean, that means so much to us. And like you just asking us, how can we pray? And you have somebody write us and ask us, that means a lot to us. So thank you very much.
I know we're probably going beyond time, but I know you're going to say two other things, and then I'll be quiet. I am praying for you that you will develop a love for the St. Louis Cardinals. But let me say one other thing. This regards Pastor Wells. When was it? I don't know. It was last July or sometime. We went to Springfield for their 60th wedding anniversary, the Wellses. Pastor Wells he's moving into dementia, but at that time he was still pretty lucid. And we had a big reception for them. There was about 200 of us that came, ex-hippies, that all got saved, and everybody's telling their hippie stories when they'd sit in front of the TV and watch PTL and smoke marijuana and stuff like that. But anyway, we prayed for him, and we laid hands on him, and we prayed for him. And this will sound really crazy, this revelation. But as I prayed for him, I thought, my goodness, Lord, you sent him here to this city because you knew what you were going to do in this city. And you knew that we were going to be such a tough bunch that you had to send him to Africa for 8 years to prepare him for coming back to Springfield, Illinois, and taking a church full of ex-hippies and drug addicts. And I mean, that's really how it was. And I started to pray that, and some people looked like, are you crazy? But he didn't step down. He stepped, into a greater thing. And I'm thinking, man, we must have been a tough bunch if we had to prepare him for 8 years in Nigeria with the Muslims and everybody else in the Biafran War and all that crazy stuff, so he could come back to Springfield. I thought, boy, God measures things in a different way than we do. I'm done.
Okay.
This has been great, guys. Let me have Pastor Doug pray for you. And again, thank you so much. And like you said, it's an honor. It truly is an honor to continue to support you guys wherever God calls you, however he uses you. The relationship goes far beyond anything I could ever imagine. We've been through a lot together, and you guys are my heroes. Just growing up and hearing your stories and seeing the way God's used you. So this is so much fun, and I've enjoyed it very much. But I'll let Pastor pray over you, and we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Father, we thank you for your kingdom, for your grace, and for calling us into the fellowship of your Son and with each other. We thank you for Robbie and Pat. We pray blessings on them, strength, vision, sufficient grace. Bless their children and grandchildren. Protect them, Lord. Just let the glory of God shine upon them. Use them. Continue to provide for them every step of the journey. We thank you for the lifelong fellowship and relationship we've had with them. As a church, we pray blessing and encouragement to them, that you will keep his hands raised, keep her hand raised, and let us be as an Aaron and Hur that will hold their hands up as you give victory to your people. Do a great thing in the earth, do a great thing in Mexico, and we give you the praise for it in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen.